Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards. This is a video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Festival. Festival is a 5-cost action from the base game, and it says +2 actions, +1 buy, +2 coins. So the first thing that we're going to look at, and the most important part of Festival, is that first line there, +2 actions. So +2 actions is what we call a village. Not to be confused with the actual card village, just that usually refers to a card that lets you play multiple terminals in a turn. Now, there's a big difference with Festival compared to most other villages, and that is that Festival is a stop card. There is no plus card anywhere on this card. So it turns out for Village, the +1 card effect is actually really important for your reliability when you're trying to draw your deck, which is what you're normally trying to do when you're adding villages to your deck. It's a lot harder to draw your deck and do it very consistently with a Festival. So on the general rule, the more stop cards you have, the higher chance there is of a dud hand, because sometimes all your stop cards will just clump together, and the more of them you add in, the more likely you are to end up in a situation where that happens. So with Festival, your villages being the stop cards means that a big chunk of what you're using to draw becomes stop cards, and that just means that you can just have your turns die either at the start or halfway through your turn. They just stop drawing, and that's kind of a big deal. If you haven't got pretty good trashing and you're only trashing cards very, very slowly, or you can't trash like your coppers, for example, then this is really bad for Festival. It can have big problems trying to draw in those cases. So when in our Smithy video, we talked about Village and Smithy pairs and talked about how each pair supports an extra 2 other stop cards. Well, with Festival, those sorts of comparisons, you have to reduce the number of stop cards by 1. That's because you're missing a +1 card that you would get from a regular village. So you are just drawing 1 less card for each combo. So what this means is that this is vastly reducing what else you can do with your deck other than try to draw it in these sort of traditional terminal draw decks, like Smithy-like cards. And when you look at cards that are weaker than Smithy, like Moat or Witch, that only have +2 cards, it gets a lot worse because if you think about it, if you play a Festival in your hand, you go from 5 cards to 4, and then you play, say, a Moat, you go from 4 to 3, and then you draw 2, and you're back up at 5. So it's actually not possible, if Festival like Moat is your only draw, to actually get your hand above 5. And that's a real problem, because you sort of just can't add anything else at all to the deck and before it starts to crumble. And of course, at some point, a lot of the time, you're going to have to add some victory cards, and they will get in the way, and your deck will really, really struggle to actually do anything other than play some Festivals until it stops working. And also, for each time you're playing a Festival and Moat pair, you're hoping that the 2 cards you draw are going to be 1 more Festival and 1 more Moat, which just a lot of the time isn't going to be the case, right? You'll play a Festival Moat and draw 2 Moats, and that's it for your turn. Or you play Festival Moat and draw 2 Festivals, and you haven't got any more draw anymore, so the turn just stops there, and you will just see that happen a lot. So Festival isn't really able to draw your deck if the draw is weak in that regard. Although we talk about with like Smithy Festival that it can support 2 other stop cards, and that is true, if you don't have that many stop cards, then you just become way more likely to find other villages and other smithies, and that makes it very likely for your turn to keep going. So the less stop cards you support, just so much harder it is to actually draw your deck and do much. Of course, just +2 actions isn't the only thing Festival is doing. for you, it's also giving you money. So you can think of it as a source of economy. So let's imagine we wanted a festival just for money, right? So you've got here a stop card that's giving you 2 coins. Well, there's always a stop card available that gives you 2 coins, and that's silver. So festival, while analogies can sometimes be pretty unhelpful in that they don't properly get across all of the nuance, and there's always little scenarios in which it's different when you use an analogy. One thing you can think festival is kind of like is like picking up a village and a silver at the same time. So what you've got, your village being a cantrip, it replaces itself. And if you imagine that village always drew a silver, then you've kind of got most of what festival is doing for you. You get the extra action, and then you just get this stop card that's giving you 2 money. So you usually, when you draw your deck, you don't want a lot of silvers. You would much rather have either other cards that are giving you money but also having some other nice effect, like, say, militia, or you would want golds. Gold is a lot better than silver. It's just, you just need less stop cards in your deck when you're using gold instead of silver. To get equivalent money in silver, you've got to add a significant number of extra stop cards. And as soon as you start adding victory cards, it becomes really hard to keep that stable. Doesn't mean you're not ever... you never use silver as your only way of getting money when you're drawing your deck. But usually you try and do a little bit better than that. So if you were using festival as the only source of your economy... it's like trying to just add a whole bunch of silvers. And if you only want the money, you don't care about the other things festival's doing for you, well, it's just way, way cheaper to just straight up buy a regular old silver. So, festival isn't something that you throw into your deck just because you only want the money. The key with festival is, of course, that it's still a village. What it is that when you buy festival, you are getting those actions that you need to support your other cards, particularly draw, but you're also adding the amount of money that your deck produces. So that means that your deck, like when you are drawing it, you can focus a little bit more on just adding draw cards earlier, because you're adding in a load of villages at the same time, and you're still growing your deck, so you can then start buying more cards more quickly. It's giving you 2 coins and a buy. So it's really nice in that regard, in that it just lets you increase and improve your deck upon multiple metrics at the same time. You're upping your payload at the same time as you're helping to add in the engine components. And that can be quite nice. So you don't have to... You're getting multiple things, so you have to buy less cards overall. You don't need to take time out to pick up treasures like golds and silvers, because you're adding the money to your deck while also adding in the village. While we're here, we're going to talk... this is not unique to Festival, but we're going to talk about action cards that give you money. So sometimes it's unusually good for a deck, like it really wants to support having all of your money come from action cards. And we're just going to go through a couple of cases where this is why you might want this. So number one, sometimes you get attacks in the kingdom that want to get rid of all of your treasures. And so if you are able to generate your money in non-treasure form, you are protected from those attacks. So Bandit in Pirate Ship are some examples. Bandit in the base game, Pirate Ship in Seaside. Admittedly, these sorts of attacks often only have more presence and in multiplayer. Like you can often just ignore the bandit attack in 2-player. But, you do get these situations where this really matters. And Festival is just a type of action card that gives you money. And so it's good for those. Sometimes you have decks that specifically want to be made almost entirely of action cards. So Vassal, that we've already seen from the base game, if you have your deck entirely of actions, it'll effectively never miss as long as you still have something in your draw pile. So not adding in treasures and adding in actions instead makes it a lot more useful and a lot harder to miss. Scrying Pool from Alchemy, it will keep drawing cards as long as it keeps drawing action cards. So if your deck consisted only of action cards, when you play a Scrying Pool, you just draw every card in your deck all at once, which is pretty crazy. So you really don't want to add treasures to that either. So cards like Festival and Vassal and other ways of getting money through actions can be really good there. Similarly, Herald, sort of like Vassal in the way that it tries to find actions in your deck by picking a card at random, and basically, I say at random, it's just the top card of your deck after it's drawn one, and if it's an action, it plays it. So again, if you can have your deck almost entirely made of actions, Herald does quite a lot for you. It plays all these action cards, and it's sort of like having draw. So Festival's really nice as a village in these sorts of decks because they help you avoid having to add in the treasures that gum up these sorts of decks. Lastly, Draw to X. So we're going to talk about Library in its own video, but Draw to X is a concept where the card draws you up to a certain number of cards, and Festival is probably, out of all the cards that have been made in Dominion, like the number one card that you can have to go with Draw to X. Because what you usually want in Draw to X is you want villages, and you also want money in a form that doesn't come as a treasure. Because Draw to X wants you to play cards and get them out of your hand before playing the next one. A lot of cards that give you money, action cards that generate you coins, are either cantrips like Merchant or Poacher, or they are terminal, so cards like Militia. And so to support terminal money that decreases your hand size when you play it, you need quite a lot of villages, but Festival being a village itself means that you can spend a lot of those villages on more libraries, and you play the festivals and your hand size goes down, so like the libraries get a lot better. So Festival Library is like a bit of a combo in the base game because it's just the perfect card to go with Draw to X, and Library is a Draw to X card in the base game, but it sort of applies to all of the Draw to X cards. So Festival is incredibly good when you see Draw to X, if Draw to X is how you want to be drawing your deck. Like, Festival is really what you want in those cases. There is more to this card that we haven't looked at yet, so +1 buy. The +1 buy on Festival, although we've left it to last, it's actually a really important part of this card. It's +1 buy in general can sometimes encourage you to get that card when you might otherwise not do so. So if you really want villages that draw and they are available, you might be picking them up over Festival. But the fact that Festival gives you a buy means that you might just grab some anyway. And this is a form of buy that comes with 2 extra coins on it, which is really quite nice actually for buy. So sometimes Festival is your only village. When that happens, you are just going to get a lot of buys. You see this sometimes with buys. They just are slapped onto a card that you want a lot of copies of anyway, and you're going to be playing a load of them when drawing your deck. And when that happens, you just end up with a whole load of buys every turn, and sometimes you can really make good use of that. So if there's a lot of very good cheap cards, usually like 2 or 3 that you can support a lot of copies of. If you have Festival as your village, well, you can suddenly start amassing a whole bunch of these cheap cards. And it also gives you the ability to pile out the estates instead of buying 2 provinces for a cheeky 3-pile win. These are all important things you need to think about, and so sometimes you get these Festival games like Festival Library engines where you just have a whole bunch of buys, and that's something you need to think about while assessing your game plan. So sort of in summary, in your traditional engine, when you're thinking about cards like Smithy, as a village, Festival is a bit weaker. That's because it's missing the draw. It's also very expensive because it costs 5. Villages are normally pretty cheap, and buying cards that cost 5 all the time can be very difficult. Even though it's giving you money, it's quite a cost. You can't add as many villages as quickly as you can sometimes with like 3-cost villages where you can just buy a whole load all at once. Not so much with a festival. It's good though, however, in the way that it lets you build your deck along 2 different axes, but if you buy a lot of them, then you need to expect that your deck is going to start having these turns where it falls apart just by the nature of adding a lot of stop cards to your deck. But although all of these things sort of sound like negatives against festivals, sometimes it really does come into its own. There are, as you add expansions in particular, all sorts of awkward cards that get added. So just the basics of drawing your deck, getting villages, getting buys, getting money. The game plays around with this quite a lot, and you can get some pretty awkward and weird ways of trying to draw this, because it's usually so good to try and draw your deck you want to do it anyway, even if the game makes you jump through hoops to do it. And sometimes Festival really comes into its own in decks like this. Its very unique properties of a load of money and no draw is actually a benefit to it, so you've just got to watch out for that. I gave you the example of draw to X, which is a very awkward form of draw. It just excels in situations like that. It's I don't want to say it's a unique card, but it's certainly very, very different from regular Village. But I would say that you tend to get it slightly less overall. It's probably weaker as a Village just because you really want those cheap engine components to zoom up quickly, and also you really want the plus card on Village, and Festival is neither cheap nor does it draw, and that's a big problem that it has. So we are now going to go over to the online client, and we are going to generate some random kingdoms that include Festival, and we're going to assess them and see what sort of impact we think it's going to have. So what we've got here, we've got Trashing with Sentry and Remodel. We have Draw with Council Room and Laboratory and Moat. Festival is our only village. Is it our only plus buy? No, there is Council Room. So we want to get up to Sentry pretty quickly. I don't think Workshop is something you start with here. You can't really support all that many moats. So you don't want Merchant straight away, and Poacher is not so good. You maybe open... Do you open Remodel? I guess you probably open Silver Poacher and you just look to trash with Sentry. You don't open with Remodel. I think you want some laboratories at first, and I think you can go for a little while with just a lot of these non-terminal cards. You will have a silver. You can eventually use a workshop as your terminal and pick up a bunch of merchants. In terms of draw, how good is Council Room Festival? Well, the problem with Council Room is that it's drawing your opponent's cards, and that's quite good for them. So I think you would actually prefer Laboratory, and then eventually... maybe with Bandit, maybe you do go more Festival, Council Room. You add some labs, but I think it's okay to add a few Festivals and Council Rooms, perhaps. I guess the problem with Merchant and picking up Workshop here is that Bandit can potentially cause it some problems. Then again, no, I don't think you want to go Festival Moat. I was just thinking maybe you could support get some moats because they're cheap with Workshop, but no, I don't think you do that. I think that you're going to have maybe one Council Room or two, and you're going to use that just to not need to buy so many laboratories, and it's nice. But you will be using most of your economy with Bandit and Gold, and you're going to get a remodel, and you're going to remodel into provinces. So I think there's sort of a deck here where you want a few festivals, You might get 3 or 4. You might have just like 1 council room, but you're really going to be using your labs mostly. So festival's all right, but I think the limits, it puts some limits on how you're going to draw your deck. It's expensive to get. You don't actually want that many of them, so you don't have that many villages, and it stops you like using. If there was regular village, you would gain it with workshop and you would have a load of moats as well, but that's not the case here. So festival is important there, but because it's the only village, it does put some limits on how much you're going to do, because it's just not as good at giving you villages. It's not as good at giving you actions as regular village. Speaking of regular village, here's the second kingdom. We really want to trash all the way down with chapel straight away. We're going to open chapel and poacher, I suppose. And then we have a village smithy engine. But what do we do once we've trashed down and we have that engine? So we don't care about mine. We've got market, we've got festival. It might be that festival is actually fine with smithy, and that's just because we need to do something, and festival is actually going to give us a bunch of economy. So I think you can, once you've got a festival and you've got some money and buys, you can look into markets, and maybe then with all the buys you can pick up moats and villages and smithies. Just moats because they're really cheap, and you can probably get villages as well. So I think you're getting a mixture of like festivals, smithies. I think just because the payload is so weak, you're actually fine to use festivals for money, just to let you get your draw up consistently. Like once you have a load of festivals, you can just add a bunch of smithies, and that then lets you start to eventually province using festival for some money. But like market, poacher just don't feel all that great in terms of adding deck money quickly. So maybe you get some festivals for the buys. You're going to add a few golds, and you will be looking to also village smithy when you're buying extra components with a little bit of spare money. So you might get like a province and a village on a turn, or a province and a smithy, and you'll just continue to build that way. And I think that is probably how we're going to go on this game. So here, festival again, it's nice because it's a village, it gives you some money, it helps you build early on after you've had all of this trashing. So you can start to build up while getting components, but you're not going to want too many, because you're going to want to... village smithy is really going to help a lot more than festival smithy once you start adding the green. And also gold is like your main payload, which is another form of stock card, so you don't want too many festivals. So another card that we're going to get, but we're not going to get too many of them. What's going on here? So we have festival and library in this game, so that's nice. So that's a thing we can do. There is absolutely no trashing, so it's actually not a thing we can do because there is witch. Festival is our only village, so this is a bit awkward. So you really want to get to witch as soon as you can, so you're going to open militia and silver on a 4-3, I think. Yes, you will. You really want militia to stop them hitting 5. You're going to junk them with curses. And because you have all your 10 starting stop cards, and also there's cursing going on with witch, it's not actually worth buying any villages at all. You're just going to look to get some golds. Maybe you get some labs, maybe you don't, and maybe you just add a council room to just play that once per turn, once all the curses are gone, or you just go double witch money and have a militia in your deck, and you just do that, and you just decide not to bother with terminal draw just because you've already got like some witches, 2 witches and a militia. You don't really want to draw them dead with a big draw card like council room. So yeah, I think otherwise you just sort of get a lab, and it's probably okay to have some poachers, and it's just money otherwise. So I see festival as completely ignorable here, because villages in general are completely ignorable here, and there are better things you can do than have a festival in your card if it's just a source of money. You would much rather have gold. For a second I thought I clicked the wrong button there. Let's take a look at kingdom number 4. What have we got here? So we have a festival and throne room as our own as our villages. We've got chapel and sentry, so we're going to trash down really quickly, and we've got artisan, so we can pick up festivals and libraries very fast. So this is a super festival library game. Throne room, we can throne festival for even more money while still reducing our hand size. So we want as many of these 3 cards as we can get, mostly festivals. Maybe we don't think we bother with sentry here because we got chapel, so we're going to chapel and we're going to look to build up, maybe with a vassal and a silver, just to try and get a festival and then get to artisan and then pick up a load of festivals and some libraries and then some throne rooms, and we just go crazy with these, and eventually we hit double province, and we kind of don't really want anything else in our deck. I guess we can add some vassals as well with the extra buys. Yeah, so festival is the main source of money here, I would say, and it does exceptionally well with library and throne room here. So festival is the main card on this board. You've got stuff that goes extremely well with it. So, and you've even got Cellar to really help with Draw to X. Yeah, this is a crazy Draw to X board that just generates so much money. So festival, incredible there. And it looks like we've got it again, but this time, this is kind of similar, but we've got Sentry for trashing instead of Chapel, and there's like no Cellar either. So we really want to get to Sentry first, and then we want to hit Artisan. So we are going to be opening double silver on a 4-3, and we're going to get to Sentry. We're going to try our hardest to get to Artisan, and then we just go back to Festival Library Engine. It's not as good as the last one because there's no throne room. There are some markets. They seem quite slow, but Artisan can do it. And I think you can also... I think you can actually, because you've got so many festivals, it's easy to add a workshop and just pick up a load of merchants and have 1 silver in your deck still, if you can. And I think you just try and draw it anyway, and you can get a fair bit of money into your deck fairly quickly through that. You're not going to worry about Council Room or Bureaucrat or Harbinger here. Market you only sort of pick up once you've stopped, once there's no festivals left. I think that's probably better. You can have Artisan and Workshop in your deck and just pick up a load of these cards, and so it's going to be somewhat similar but less faster than the last game to get a whole load of money, where Festival is going to be generating you a significant portion of your money. So Festival incredibly good here. Like I say, perfect counterpart with Draw to X, which is what's going on. So there you go. So Festival was useful there in every kingdom that actually just wanted at least 1 village. The only exception was where you didn't want a village at all. But when it was paired up with another village, like the regular village card, it lost some of its luster as the only village. And it did... We did have a kingdom there where you didn't really want to draw. You couldn't support as much just because Festival was the only one you had, so you weren't able to just get a whole load of them. You had to think quite carefully about how you build and how many stop cards you think you can support. So that's Festival, yeah. So it's overall it's quite good, but villages in general are quite good. So Festival's in good company there, but it's a bit of an awkward one. And you just need to watch out for its particular things that make it awkward, like not drawing any cards. So anyway, I hope that was useful for you, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you and goodbye.